Shall we go ahead and get started?
Sure.
All right, I'll call our meeting to order. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us. Good to have everybody here. The first item on our agenda is the approval of the agenda, but I would like to add an item that was left off. I would like to add public comments. So I need to get approval for that.
Madam Chair, I move that we accept the agenda as given with the necessary addition.
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. And our second item is to approve the minutes from our last meeting, which are, I believe, attached. So everyone looked over those?
They were actually emailed.
They were emailed. They're not attached. They were emailed. That's correct.
Yeah.
So did everybody have a chance to look over those? We want to need a motion to approve those minutes?
So moved.
I move that we approve the minutes.
Okay, and a second? Okay, thank you. Okay, now I would like to insert the public comments section. So if we have any comments from the public, we would love to hear from you. And I just opened up our floor for public comments. So if there are no public comments, then we will move forward with old business.
And there's no old business, Madam Chair.
I do not know of any old business. Does anybody else have any old business that we need to discuss? Okay, so we're moving on to new business, and our first item, John, is you.
Yes. Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'd like to introduce Bahia Greer, who's with us, and I'll let her introduce Ms. Barber, her colleague, and they have an update on where we are with our strategic plan for diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Bahia, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, very, very much, John, and good afternoon, late afternoon to everyone. Thank you so much, members of the advisory committee, members of the public, and employee and staff for allowing us to come in to your meeting this evening and present to you some of the work that we have been very, very excitedly putting together since last year, since we first came in August of last year and became a part of this community through our work together. So I would like to say that once I start this this content, as usual, I can't see anyone's hands or faces. So if you have any questions or if you need me to go back to showcase another slide, please just let me know verbally, since I won't be able to see anyone. Okay, here we go. So to kind of start off, this is a great visual of the timeline from the time that we initially started, which most of you, I'm sure, do remember back in August of last year, our engagement launched an initial communication with the city. We came off and conducted our kickoff in the very room that you're now sitting in. And this, for purposes of this particular presentation, we're going to just kind of pinpoint, in the essence of brevity, we're going to pinpoint a couple of the main points of work that we have been driving since August of last year. And it's important to note that these dates line up with the newly amended and updated deliverable that was set about. So we started in August of last year, and our intention is to conclude our work in August of this year. So for this presentation, we're going to spend more of our time on the highlighted sections, the strategic plan and synthesis. And if you look further afield, you can see that we've been steadily working on since November and continuing on this month on the strategic plan formation. So to start off, and if you ever, so for this entire deck, if you continue to look at the bottom left-hand corner, that is meant to help guide you along.
Bahia, we're having some intermittent internet issues possibly. I'm not sure if they're on your end or our end.
Oh, I'm so sorry. What was the last thing that was heard?
You said to look in the bottom left-hand corner to know where we were in the timeline.
Okay, okay, thank you. Well, that is true. Please look at the bottom left-hand corner. And that is meant to assist in guiding along the timeline to showcase the work that we have completed. And that's really meant to help you, because a lot of this particular work sometimes can look similar to work that was done in previous iterations. And we don't want to confuse anyone, and we don't want you to think that there's any kind of duplicity or redundancy in any of the work. So what you're seeing here now is an image of the strategic planning process map that was created around September of last year. And if you look at the left-hand side, that outlines the objective. Everything that we do has an outlined objective and purpose, which is presented for you to see this evening. And this particular process map actually has 10 opportunities. We don't like to call them steps. We just like to call, because they are essentially opportunities for growth, for reflection, for transformation in this work. So opportunities 1 through 5, and now opportunities 6 through 10. For our presentation this evening, we're going to take you through opportunities 1 through 6, actually, I believe. We're going to get to 6. And that would be more than the midpoint, but again, just for issues of brevity. So some of the first work that we conducted in October was our stakeholder engagement meetings. If you see here at the top, this is the objective of our stakeholder meetings. And these are opportunities for us to meet specifically with city administrative departments and community stakeholders. Community stakeholders, really, even a definition of one kind of ran the gambit. Organizations, agencies, firms and corporations or businesses that the city has worked with or partnered with in the past, has a current working relationship with, or more importantly, community groups that are somehow impact the residents of Hendersonville. So we've met with representatives of the local community college, representatives from the largest healthcare facilities in the area. I mean, just from nonprofits to other volunteer associations. And we will be providing that list of stakeholders next month when you see the final strategic plan. But one of the questions, and there were several questions that asked, but just again, for a sampling of the type of questions to meet the objectives set forth in these meetings, one of the questions was, do you feel that employees can be themselves within the office settings? What do you attribute to this? And again, this is our first blush introduction to the department heads and to community stakeholders around conversations of equity and inclusion. So this happened very shortly after our kickoff. And so we really wanted to start off with just some very wide stroke questions. Some members actually here of the advisory committee had the opportunity to sit in some of these meetings. So some of these questions may actually seem very familiar to them. So what you see here are just some of the responses presented by administrative stakeholders. And we can compare these to some of the responses from community stakeholders. And it's very interesting when we start off with these types of questions, because again, because these are kind of the first blush questions, first blush opportunities in many cases for, in some cases, community stakeholders, especially if their organizations don't specifically deal with issues of equity or community-based equity frameworks. Sometimes these questions were very surprising. And also in some cases, the city administrative departments, this was the first opportunity for them to start to really have conversations around these questions and their initial considerations of how they feel as individuals, how they feel as a representative of their departments. Here are some additional questions. Additional question. What does your department do well when it comes to promoting equity? This is an administrative stakeholder response. And we can see their responses. And when we examine these responses as a firm, we're not looking for right answers or wrong answers, right response or wrong response. Honestly, what we're initially looking for is just the honesty and transparency in the response. If individuals use language that it may be a bit outmoded, okay, well then that's what they said because that's how they felt, and that's okay. That's okay. This is definitely not a position or an activity in trying to judge individuals' position or experience in this type of work or in certain types of language. It's also interesting to note that some of our community stakeholders, when asked similar question, because all administrative and all community stakeholders were given the same questions. In some cases, our community stakeholders didn't want to answer the question. It was just more comfortable for them just to pass. And so that's why I added it in our slide deck for this evening, because it's important to understand that for some groups, these are still uncomfortable or maybe just very, very unfamiliar types of conversations. So moving on to the next step in our process. Again, we're still in October. We conducted a DEI environmental survey. And when we think of the environment, we're thinking of not necessarily our natural environment, but the environment that each individual, in this case, these are specifically to administrative departments, each individual department and individuals within each administrative department lives, works, and breathes inside of. And so the purpose of this survey was, again, to get information and gain more perspective on some of the practices, the programmatic practices, the cultural perspectives, understanding the culture of the offices themselves, and any kind of organizational support, if there was some organizational support for those particular aspects of practice and culture. And so I'm just going to showcase some of the questions that were asked. Everyone that participated again in this particular survey and in this data capture was an administrative lead with the city. So one question, going back and thinking back to 3 words to describe your office culture when you first started your role, the role that you currently occupy. And these are some of the words, responses that were provided to us. And we also, it's important to even note that that very last response, dip, lazy, cold. I still don't understand what a dip is or what it means, but it's also, but we share that to show that no matter what someone responds or how someone responds, it's so important that that transparency and honesty and responses taken verbatim are memorialized, are recorded, because dip may mean something to someone else. And it's also important to know that these are the responses that were virtually typed in by the individuals. These were not transcribed by a third party or any members of our team. An additional question, going back now and looking at your current departmental culture. And these are some of the responses that were elicited, again, by department heads. Now, if we were to compare the two, and we have a lot of these visuals that you will see in our final report, comparing some of the first blush impressions of the work environment when individuals first started compared to when they, as they now occupy these spaces. Respondents actually do highlight positive work environments. It's a feature of their departments when they first started with the city, and thankfully, that's something that has grown over time. And we did track, there are future mentions of any language that implies apprehension or confusion or even a negative work environment now. And so obviously we have more data on that, but in the essence of brevity, this is just to showcase some of the data that's captured. And it's very important for us to understand how people feel about the environment in which they work, because as we start to distill down into some of the finer points of engagement and inclusivity in the workplace, we want to make sure that that is born out of a lived experience, a true lived experience, and not a feeling of, well, I just don't like working here, or I'm just mad, or I'm just upset. So it's important for us to kind of. I'm
Sorry,
go
but
ahead.
you had a question
Yes.
on that last slide, just for clarity. The number underneath the phrase, is that the number of employees or folks that were surveyed and used that and answered that specifically?
No, that's a great question. That was the number of responses that supported that particular theme. So if we go to first started, that column, positive environment, 23 responses supported a theme of having a positive environment. 2 responses supported a theme of being busy or overworked. 4 responses supported a theme of increased growth. Does that help?
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
All right, thank you. That's a very good question. I'm sorry for not making that clear. Here's another visual image of the data that was collected. These are 2 questions that were asked in this environmental survey. And it's also very important as we examine the environment of employees within the city. We're not only just looking at like the internal circle, kind of like the family, right? You may have your nuclear family, then you have your extended family. Well, if the nuclear family are the members, the teams that you work with, your extended family would be considered the residents that you interact with, the members of the city or community that you may see off and on, not on a daily basis, not as often as you see your nuclear family, your office teams. And so, in looking from a full 360 degree approach, we wanted to analyze if employees understood how others may see them, city residents may see them, and how they are seen by city residents. So in one of these questions, do you think that most city residents understand the role and responsibilities of your office and department? Over 65% of the city administrators said no, they don't think the city residents really truly understand their role and their responsibility. And then the second question being, do you think that most of the residents understand the specific challenges faced by your office or your department? An overwhelming majority said that they do not feel that their challenges, and oftentimes that can also be explained as the difficulties of their job being understood by the people that they serve. And there's a lot to unpack with that, which we're going to talk a little bit more about that in our final plan. But I think it's important to know that this is how the individuals who do the work every day see the people that they serve. And this is the belief that they hold about the people that they serve. One of the next pinpoints along in our work was a DEI change growth questionnaire. Some people ask me, like, what's a change growth questionnaire? It's very similar to a SWOT analysis. A lot of people are familiar with the SWOT, SWOT type analysis, where you're examining some of like the strengths and the challenges of the organization. We're taking that a step further, and we're using some of this information again to like help establish some of the metrics for the strategic plan. But we're really looking at some of the internal and external factors beyond just how you view yourself. Sometimes when the SWOT analysis, we're just looking internally, kind of like looking in a mirror. But through these types of questions within this questionnaire, we're looking at some of the external factors as well. So one of the questions that was presented was, what do city residents say that your department does well? And this is just a smattering of the responses from various departments. We want to compare that to what city residents say the department does not do well. And I think it's interesting to see the perspective that, again, the administrators may have, or employees may have, because actually this change growth questionnaire was open not just to administrators, but to individuals working in various departments, regardless of where they sat on the organizational chart. And to support and help showcase some of the data that was gathered from this, we oftentimes take a look at proximity, resident proximity to centers of power. Another way of saying that is resident proximity to the individuals who have influence on their lives in many ways, right? So one of the questions, if a city resident wished to meet with you today in person, how many people would that resident need to first communicate with before a face-to-face meeting was held? So this question is really meant to ask and challenge about layers of proximity. How many folks would I need to get through to before I could sit down with you? If I had an issue, or if I had a complaint or a grievance, or just something that I needed to communicate to you. Through the responses we received, 86, almost 87% said just one person. You would have to get through one person to get to me. And then a little more than 13%, almost 13% said two people. Now, this next question is a little more interesting. If a city resident wished to meet with you this week in person, how much time would it take before a face-to-face meeting was held? So this goes really back to like the temporal layers of proximity. How much time would it take for a person, especially a resident that may have a time-sensitive issue? How long would it take for this person to be able to make contact with you face-to-face? So we see that almost 40% would say 1 day. Another 40% would say it'll take about 2 days before we can get that face-to-face. And then as we go a little further, we see almost 17% would say it would be 3 days before I could sit down and actually see you. And then 8%, almost 9% said it would take almost the entire week, 4 days, before we could actually have a face-to-face meeting. And this is important to note, right? This is important to note. When we talk about, and we're going to talk a little bit more about this when we talk about the mission and values and the vision of the city and the various departments, but we oftentimes aspirationally see ourselves as very responsive as much as we can reasonably to the needs of residents. And when we start to begin to track this and what our view or our interpretation of responsiveness is in comparison to maybe the expectations of residents and their level of what they would think responsiveness is, we begin to see some shifts and some differences. So, and again, if anyone has any questions, any comments, please just stop me and let's talk about it.
So real quick with the bottom one, as far as the response time in days, this question, I guess, was posed under normal circumstances during a regular day or regular week. I would imagine that if there were an emergency, if a water pipe had burst and water is gushing down the road, that it wouldn't be 2 days before somebody got there, right? So I guess in taking this in context, you're just simply asking the employees if or stakeholders if somebody had called you to have a meeting, I guess regardless of the department, how many days would it take for them to, I guess, kind of fit into a schedule to have you come in? Am I understanding correctly?
Yes, we created no type of scenario or narrative in the lead up to this the change growth questionnaire. Everything was taken as on a regular Tuesday, whatever regular Tuesday looks like for everyone there, with no particular other competing priorities. Just on average, what does it look like? What are the what should a resident expect?
I have a question. Well,
Please
this is
go ahead.
Jane. Oh, sorry. And are these responses still from department heads?
The change growth questionnaire is from department heads.
Okay.
Are there any other questions? Because again, I can't see any faces. And I do apologize. I really do apologize. I should have done this at the beginning of the presentation, but I wanted to introduce, because I'm not sure if you can see her face, my colleague, Barbara Bernier, who conducted a lot of, not the interviews, some of the beginning interviews that I've showcased earlier in the presentation, and some of the others when we get to procurement. She and Miss Aisha worked tirelessly on a lot of the work directly with department administrators, but I definitely want to make sure that everyone can see her. And I know that she's muted, but Barbara, if you have anything that you'd like to add to the conversation, please.
Oh,
Just
you're
jump
doing a
in.
great job. Can you hear
Well, I
me?
appreciate that. Yes, yes, we can hear you. Yeah. Okay. All right, so now we're getting, since I just mentioned Barbara procurement, we're getting into the procurement section of our work. And now we're sliding into November of last year. I know that's a very long objective, but again, everything again is to support the planning process. And so this was a longer process, namely because it required documentation from the department heads or a dedicated department liaison, but each department, administrative department, was asked to participate, and every department participated fully. I will say that, and I consistently give John a lot of kudos on his departments, because everyone has been very, very willing and open and flexible and very participatory in the process from literally day one. So if I could say that every time, I will. So these are the objectives that were laid out for the procurement meetings. And some of the data that was captured, we have so much data that was captured for every department, because with the questions and the way that the questions and the data is analyzed, we also require documentation to support the responses that each department put forth. So it's a little different than just an administrator sitting down and giving a response here, a response there. They had to back everything up with data. And we asked for very specific data. And the way that this is analyzed is through two different practices. We have what are called the codified practices and the customary practices. What we often find is that in our societies at large, we love the law. We love laws. We love things to kind of keep it between the ditches, as sometimes we say down in the deep south, right? And so we love to oftentimes be beholden to beliefs that are codified, that are written down, that we can pinpoint to and read, and will help guide us, like guideposts or barriers to work within the system. Now, we've all established that we like laws, and we have laws, but oftentimes what we find is, aside from the law, there's another way of doing things. And once a person is inculcated into a culture, and by culture I'm specifically speaking about an office culture or an organizational culture, they learn the customary practices. So the laws are great. We already know what book and what rule book to go to and where to find, the instructions on how to do this, that, and the third. But how do we do it when no one's looking? Or how do we do it when we just don't feel like going to the rule book and looking it up? Or what do we do when we're in a hurry? Or what do we do when everything else happens? And so in our procurement meetings, the purpose of this was for us to examine very, very specific codified and cultural and customary practices through each department. And I'm just showing here in this particular slide some of the questions that were asked to kind of elicit and pull out the responses. And that they're sitting side by side, so you can kind of compare the two, and they're by department. So we're only showcasing, I think, 2 departments in this particular deck this evening. So this one is from the engineering department. And without me reading everything, but I'm sure everyone can probably see, this is a kind of a text-heavy slide. You can compare hiring practices, codified hiring practices within the office. You can compare who conducts the onboarding process, and how referrals originate within the office. And then we kind of slid over to, okay, well, now that we understand that, and you've done a wonderful job of explaining in chapter and verse how people are hired and brought in officially into the department, what other ways could someone make their way into your department? Specifically in hiring, we talked a lot about, beyond a lot more than just hiring, but again, just for issues of brevity, we're only using this department and these questions because we have so much more. And we were able to gain a little bit more introspection and understanding regarding other opportunities or ways that people find themselves into positions And we also had some questions around nepotism and circles of familiarity. We just called it circles of familiarity. If I know someone that works for the city, or if I know someone who's close to someone who works for the city, are there any customary practices that would preclude a person from making their way into the department, or customary practices that would allow a person to maybe more easily make their way into the department? And so you see the responses below. And again, Barbara, since you and Ms. Aisha did a fabulous job in these procurement meetings, if you have anything you'd like to add, because I think you actually worked with engineering. Did you work with
Yes, I
engineering?
did. I did do engineering. Yeah, it was very interesting, as Bahia mentioned, to look at the rules and then see what the customary practice is. And certainly a lot of it was pretty consistent, I found, through the departments I happened to work with. So it was interesting to get people's take on what their perception was of how things are codified and how things come out in custom.
And let's, well, thank you, Barbara. Let's compare that to finance. I know this is really text heavy. Can everyone read that?
No.
Oh, okay. Oh, thank you for saying so. I'm sorry. I know it's okay. So let me just give the and obviously I'll give Allison a hard copy of this at the end. So I do apologize if the text is too small. I see Barbara squinting, and I'm squinting now too. So as opposed to, so again, because we had so many various topics and subtopics within these procurement meetings, we just showed engineering on the topic of hiring. Now this is finance on the topic of resident complaints. So the question was, one of the first questions under codified was, what process does your office follow to receive and respond to resident complaints? Can you walk through the process with me? And then the finance department, representative for the finance department, kind of explained the process, the members of that would speak to the members of the city, from the area supervisor, moving on to the city manager, to the city council, if a particular complaint needed to be either expedited or escalated up this process. And then again, we have documentation to support that. So for every, again, response, there was documentation to point this. We just, obviously, we didn't put the documentation attached, but we'll have that in the in our final report. I'm sorry, this is really, really, really small. How do residents receive information regarding your departmental policies or departmental rules? I'm not sure if you can see there, but there's actually a hyperlink that directs us to where those rules would be and where residents can go to find those rules. Next question, in what form, written, visual, auditory, online, or in person, can a resident receive information regarding your departmental policies or departmental rules? And the response gives some detail around billing policies or on the billing services application that's available to all customers. Residents can receive information regarding the finance department's policies in English and in Spanish. We had several questions regarding which types of languages are available for residents, not to assume that everyone speaks American English, and in what manner can they choose to receive that information. So now we're switching over to customary. And again, these questions are meant to deal with similar issues from codified, but just the questions are posed in a different way. So this question is, what efforts are undertaken to ensure that residents understand who makes the day-to-day decisions that impact them most memorably? The response is, other than what City Council releases to the public or what is sent out through social media, the department, and again, this is the finance department, is not sure how residents understand who makes day-to-day decisions that impact them. Question, if a resident communicated to you an unpleasant experience or unfortunate issue, grievance, or general complaint, would they receive a response from you personally? Response, if the issue is related to billing or utility, the finance director will respond personally. However, if the issue is related to another matter, the issue will be handled by the supervisor in the relevant department. Question, would that response be communicated in person, virtually, in writing, or through another departmental employee? The response, Responses to all issues from residents are communicated in kind by the relevant department supervisor. Now, some people, a lot of people would see this and say, oh, look at the similarities. We oftentimes are going to look at this through a critical eye and look at the differences. And the differences are nuanced. I will say they're nuanced. And it's not a value issue. It's not a wrong response. It's not a bad response or anything like that. But it's important for us to be able to examine and see that with the codified practices, we had a very clear outlined approach of escalation if there was a grievance or an issue. Through these other responses, and it's oftentimes it's just a matter of asking the question differently, we're able to see what usually happens. Now we can see that there's a lot of similarity again between the customary and the codified practices, with maybe some a small distinction that, and honestly, at the end of the day, very well may end up in the same resolution with the same result for that particular resident. But again, in our analysis, which is written out, which you'll see in the final report, some of the differences and some of the suggested remarks or recommendations that we have will be placed here. Robert, do you have anything to add? I'm not sure if you did finance. No, I think Ms. Aisha did finance.
No, I didn't do finance.
Finance
but-
too?
No, I didn't do, she did finance.
Okay.
But what you raised is on point, I think, with many of the departments that we looked at.
Well, since, are there any questions before we continue on with procurement? Okay. So again, continuing on with our procurement meetings, one of the additional, this is the fourth step actually, going back to that map that I showed earlier in the top, at the beginning of our presentation. This jumps into the fourth step of our planning process map. And the objective here was to co-develop and or reframe, if a particular department already had their own mission, purpose, core values, and vision statement. Now we understand that the city has a mission, purpose, and value statement, and I believe that the city council also has one that was published. Please correct me if I'm wrong, anyone, online. But one of the things that we intend on, one of the objectives that we had was to help develop a purpose, mission, and values and vision statement for each individual department. And then once that is created, marry that to an overall statement for the city itself. So without going into every single department and which department came up with, again, an issue of brevity, these are some of the questions that were used to help, again, co-design with the department leaders their individual statements. So we're just showcasing one question with 3 different responses from 3 different departments. And can everyone see these, or is it still too small?
We can see them.
We can see it.
Okay, thank you. And I know this is pretty text heavy, but one of the things that we continuously work on as we are working with department leaders in crafting their statements is a focus on the why, like what keeps your department going? What keeps you going? What keeps members of your team going? Why do you continue to do the work that you do? As you can see here, there are varied responses for what the departments hope to achieve, why they are doing the work that they do. And I think it's also interesting to note that the second question, one of the second questions here, what would you want to change in your department pertaining to any mission, goals, values, and or vision? Now, it's important to note not all departments actually had a statement. Some departments were working on a statement. We found the departments in different levels and different stages. Some departments never had a statement, had no interest in creating a statement, didn't want a statement. Some departments were actually in the midst of recrafting and reframing and their established statements. Some departments had not created a statement yet, but were interested in creating one and series of statements and were working towards that. And so taking everyone where they are, you can just see some of the responses that we have here. And these are the verbatim responses from some of the administrators from the departments. And one of the reasons, again, that we showcase this is it's important for us to understand that, you know, sometimes people are happy. When I say people, I mean departments are happy with where they are. They do believe that they are showcasing and presenting their values and their mission in a way that is digestible and easily understood by the people that they serve. And what we showcase is the data, not in a way to say that they're right or they're wrong, but this is where the conversation begins. If these are your espoused values and goals and vision, do you think that is being purposely transcribed and transmuted to the people that you serve? And some of the data that we just showcased before is used to support that or refute that. Okay. So coming into just again to show the timeline, the purpose of our presentation was just kind of to give a slight update, mid-most timeline of where we are and what we've been up to for these since last year. This last part, November to March of this year, obviously we're in strategic plan formation. We should have the plan to you at the end of this month, beginning of April, and our plan is to present it to the larger city council at the end of next month. So, and in an interest of not being redundant or regurgitating some of the similar information, we wanted to kind of keep this presentation as short but as interesting as possible. So, are there any questions?
So just to put a fine point on it, so we've been working behind the scenes. I know folks were wondering behind the scenes, a lot of interviews. We've been doing, we started in the fall with the public stakeholder interviews, and now we've been doing a lot of work with our departments. And Bahia and her team have been very flexible as we've tried to move people around to get everybody scheduled so they can have the interviews. But I think our team has been available, made themselves available. So we appreciate also the flexibility from Bahia and Ms. Barbara and the rest of the team. So a lot of the internal work as we go to develop the strategic plan and present it to City Council.
Yes.
If I may ask, what have been some challenges for you?
I could list a couple, and when I want to be as specific as possible to, I guess, truly understand the question. Are you just talking like broad stroke challenges? Or?
Well, yeah, I know y'all have been working hard to meet with everyone, other than maybe scheduling challenges. What's or obstacles, I guess. What have been some major obstacles that you've hit when dealing with stakeholders in the city, if there are any?
It's interesting. So I always lean on the value of words and the importance of using words to get you where you want. So I would love if I can, if I may be so bold, to reframe that word of challenges probably with opportunities. We've had some opportunities to help clarify our intentions with the work that we're doing. We've had opportunities to help individuals, and when I say individuals, I actually do mean people now. Individuals who sit in positions of authority and power, maybe as administrators, individuals who sit in positions of authority and power maybe it's leaders of nonprofits and other organizations. You know, we were kind enough, the last time we were in Hendersonville, we held an impromptu meeting with the Chamber of Commerce and kind of introduced the work that we're doing. And again, another opportunity to showcase what diversity, equity, and inclusion based processes and frameworks really do look like, how it's not taking something away from people. We don't look at things with a deficiency mindset. We're not pulling something away and we're not giving something to other people. It's not meant to disrupt a balance that leaves certain individuals bereft of resources and garner all the resources for other people. So a lot of work in just trying to help people understand what the work truly means. And but it hasn't been anything that in any way has been you know, an obstruction to our ability to do the work. It's not that much of a surprise, to tell you honestly, because it's something that we see in a lot of different places.
Mhm.
You know, just a lot of either confusion or misunderstanding or misinformation or disinformation. So I think that's the challenge I think that comes to mind the most. And Barbara, would you love to share?
Yeah, I was just thinking as you were mentioning that, I think given our experience from the beginning, connecting with two community leaders, holding evening sessions for, you know, community people to come out, a lot of discussion with nonprofits really gives us a real broad understanding of how the city, not just on the internal, not just dealing with residents, but how the city interacts with outside stakeholders. I found to be very interesting. I learned a lot in a very short amount of time about how there's a relationship that exists between the nonprofits, for instance, in the city and how they interact. I found that to be particularly interesting. And then I just want to put a plug in for the work we did in terms of connecting with administrators and scheduling. You know, we had to schedule a few things, but for the most part, if that was the only thing, I mean, in terms of trying to get people together, which is always a challenge, or as Bahia would say, an opportunity. And I found the administrators were very open and very honest and brought us a lot of good, frank discussions about their perceptions of what was going on, what needed to happen. We had a question, I think it said, you know, what do you perceive? How do you perceive your department in 5 years, 10 years? And that really gave us a real understanding of what was going on, especially with administrators who have been there for a long period of time and those who have been there for a short period of time. So that was an interesting amount of information just to glean from their perspective. So I found it to be very informative, and like I said, staff and administrators were incredibly kind and worked with us to make these appointments happen. So I want to thank them all for that as well.
Yeah, that's true. And if I could piggyback, just because when Barbara mentioned that brought up something else. I guess a challenge that I don't want to say I foresee, but because of the experience we had with trying to gather and get the community groundswell, that is a concern, if I can share that, because we understand that not everyone may be as available as the administrators have made themselves, but it's beyond its availability. This is only half of our work, and I cannot stress that enough. Like this short 24 deck slide that we're sharing is just a quick little update. We come back next month and showcase the larger plan. After that, that's when some of the heavy lifting really does begin, because that transitions us into our community work, our community-based work. And we need help. We need help in getting the community ready and excited for some of this work. We need help with getting the word out so that people understand what this work is and what this work is not. So I think that's an opportunity, an area of opportunity.
What kind of help are you talking about? What could we do as our DI committee to help you with this?
Well, something, a benefit that you have beyond us and our team is that you are full-time residents entrenched in the culture and the community of Hendersonville. And so like Barbara alluded to, not just alluded to, like mentioned, when we had some of our community-based programming, I want to say it was September of last year. And the turnout was very low, very low. And we can start off months in advance advertising. We can start off communicating as much as possible. But when people hear, or people are invited, or people are brought along or carpooled in by people that they know and that they know have their best interests at heart, who are members and pillars of this community, as you all are, it definitely helps with creating the groundswell that we need for some of this work. A lot of the work that you will see, a lot of the content is going to be based off of the data and the work that we've done for the first half of the RFP.
I think another way to help would be, given the constituencies that we tried to touch base with before, you know, particular interest in Hendersonville are the young people. And I ran a group one night for young people and only one person showed up. So being able to bring them in, because we really need, as future taxpayers, we really need to get their voice in the discussion as well. And or having religious people come. I think there was an invitation to have various and sundry ministers and rabbis and what have you to come. And I don't remember, I didn't do that group, but we had a low number. So if the community leaders would, participate, it would be very helpful in bringing credibility to the process, and also in how Hendersonville as a city interacts with those people, because it is about the whole collective. So another way to help.
And we'll be providing more information about the specific work that we'll be doing following the presentation in April, but we're just kind of putting in the plug now that in terms of opportunities, that's an opportunity.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Bahia and Barbara. So great presentation. Look forward to seeing the report as it moves along. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, Madam Chair, in the essence of time, I'm going to ask our utilities engineer, Adam Stewart, to come forward. Adam has been part of a national leadership program, and one of the initiatives there was looking at the impact of utility service and related to DEI. So, and Adam actually brought this to me after he completed the leadership program through the American. I'll let him talk about it. So this is not something that it's Adam's idea. Let's put it that way.
Great. Well, good afternoon, and thanks for having me. I appreciate the opportunity to talk a little about the utility diversity side. I'm an engineer, so I talk a lot about pipes and pumps and flow. So this is something that's new to me, and I think is really good and important. Let's see. There we go. Okay, great. So a little background on the utility. We serve water and wastewater. You can see our service area on water on the left. We serve about 75,000 people in Henderson County outside of the city. Actually, about 70% of our water customers are outside of the city limits. Our water system is about 685 miles of water pipe that's strewn about the county. We have 54 water pump stations and 24 water storage tanks. On the sewer side, a little smaller on sewer, on the green area, we serve about 20,000 people, mostly in the city, a little bit outside, and we have about 180 miles of pipe. The utility is comprised of about 93 dedicated utility staff. Those are folks that work for the utility, although the city as a whole, including John, as much as I'm sure he loves it, he is a big proponent of the utility as well. We have 2 treatment facilities. You can see our sewer treatment plant is on the left. That's a 4.8 million gallons per day facility. And the water treatment plant is on the right. That facility can produce 12 million gallons per day of water. So enough about pipes and flow and water. And this is the Leadership Academy that John mentioned. This is a program that the American Water Works Association has developed. They're the largest and oldest water professional organization, I think, in the world, definitely in North America. And it is funded through an EPA grant. This is the first program of this kind that they've offered. And the key, I think, for this program that's unique is it's transformative. So really, they're looking at society, environmental and financial issues for the utility and utilities across the nation. So here we had our first in-person meeting in Atlanta. I think it was about a month ago. So you can see this is the first group. There's folks from all across the North America. There's a gal there from Saskatchewan, Canada. There's a person from Hawaii. So it's a very good, diverse group. So there's a picture of us all. So today's slides, coming out of as I'm taking a part of this Leadership Academy, thought it'd be good to look at utility employment characteristics, nationally and then here locally. Same thing for utility systems management, performance, and trust in the utility, affordability, and customer assistance programs, and then maybe discussing a little bit of our Hendersonville's utility goals when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So here's some charts from, again, this is American Water Works Association information. This is the national age diversity employment in the water sector. You'll notice here that the water sector in general is aging. 68% is over the age of 45. And that's actually a big concern in the industry overall is, these folks are retiring. And, we need to make sure that we'll have the younger generation, step in when they're off sitting on the beach and enjoying retirement. So for Hendersonville, this is, like I mentioned earlier, the whole city is part of the utility. So this is all of the city. So you can see we're actually quite the opposite. We have quite a few, or I'd say the majority of our employees are actually under the age of 45. So I thought that was pretty interesting. They talk about gender diversity in the water sector. So overall, it is a heavily male-dominated industry. 76% are males. One thing that I thought was interesting about this was if you look at the younger than 25 column, there's actually about 70% female versus 30% male. So I thought that was a really interesting trend, again, stepping in and moving into that next generation of water industry folks. The city, you can see the blue, but I think it's 78% male and 22% female. So similar trend to the overall water industry. Ethnic diversity. So again, the ethnicity of the water sector in whole is mostly 84% white. You can compare that to, I think that's the census data from 2020 is the nation at 60%. And then you can see some of the other groups in the breakdown. Here's on the right, this is the city of Hendersonville's ethnic diversity. 91% of the workforce is white. Thought it was important to compare this to Henderson County's demographics. So that's from the 2021 census data. It's about 81% white in Henderson County. So the utility the city does somewhat reflect the population that it serves. It could improve, but it does somewhat reflect the community. And if there's any questions about anything, feel free to stop me. I'll move out of employment and kind of move into a little more utility specific items now. So this graph came from the North Carolina statewide water and wastewater infrastructure master plan. And it's looking at the different areas in which utilities have to focus on your infrastructure management, your organizational management, and your financial management. And I guess the importance of this is to become a viable utility. Our utility is an enterprise fund. So 100% of our operations comes from utility bills and utility ratepayers. We don't operate off of taxes. So it's very important that the enterprise fund is self-sustaining to be a viable utility. Thank you. So the state of North Carolina defines viability financially, based a little bit on your service area and your customer base. To be a viable utility, you want to have a larger customer base. You want to be able to spread your operating costs over a large number of customers. So those few customers aren't burdened with the expense of running a utility, economies of scale. It's also, you look at your economic indicators of your customers, is this population growing or is it declining? Are people moving away? What's the poverty rate of your customers? Median household income, unemployment, and looking at the property valuation per capita. They're good indicators of a community's financial bearing. Utilities also that have high rates, especially comparing those rates to the median household income. Those higher rates, it's tough for folks to pay those rates to operate an unviable utility. And then utilities that have a high debt service, maybe they've overextended themselves with a lot of projects and they're paying off these loans for projects. North Carolina actually has 95 utilities that have been designated as distressed under this criteria. And a lot of those utilities are smaller communities, a lot of them in rural areas. And I think a vast majority of them are in the eastern part of the state. But a lot of, these parameters are what were used to evaluate those. So now look at Safe Drinking Water Act violations. So the Safe Drinking Water Act is a federal legislation that protects drinking water, and it sets chemical contaminant limits. There's also monitoring and reporting limits that utilities have to provide. So this is from a study, I think of about 12,000 utilities across the nation, local government run utilities like ours, with a service population of greater than 10,000. So the findings of this study kind of correlated the number of Safe Drinking Water Act violations and compared that to the population that's below the poverty line and also by race. So you can see on the left chart is the Hispanic population percentage and percentage above the property line on the y-axis. And then on the right, it's Black population percentage and the percentage below the poverty line there. So there was a correlation between communities or water systems that served high percentage of, folks in these ethnicity groups and in the higher population or the higher poverty rate, right? So lower percentage, but lower percentage in the ethnicity, but also a lower percentage on poverty. There was a less likely of a trend for a safe drinking water violation. So I thought that was an interesting study. And we've kind of seen some recent water system failures. These have been in the news. I think Flint, Michigan's probably the number one that probably comes to mind, but even more recently, Jackson, Mississippi. And there's a couple of those communities, their economic and socioeconomic makeup. And, I thought it was important. And one of the big things that, that this academy is they mention a lot is, these water system failures, if they happen in Detroit or Mississippi, they still affect the trust and the confidence that consumers have everywhere. In Flint, Michigan, they have safe drinking water now, but I don't know how long it's going to take for that community to start drinking out of the tap. It's probably going to be a while. So hopefully you guys can see this. We'll breeze through it, but here's another survey nationally and the question posed was, do you view your water at the faucet is safe. So overall, I think there are a little over 2,000 folks that were surveyed here. So overall, 72% thought their tap water was safe, which sounds good, but what about the other 28%? You know, that's a pretty good percentage. And you can also see it's broken down by, male or female. So if you look on the far right, you can see that there was a higher percentage that males thought, 78% of males thought their water was safe, while 67% of females thought it was safe. So a lower percentage. There's also trends in age. Generally, the younger populations, don't feel as confident in their tap water as the older populations. And then getting into ethnicity, you can see 75% of the white population viewed their water as safe. And then for Hispanics, Black, and other, that percentage decreased.
And this is a national.
It was a national. Yeah. So here's a little more breakdown of that same survey. So this is over the past 3 years. You can, I think, kind of generally see that the confidence has dropped a little bit over time. But breaking it down even more, you can see the trends based on ethnicity. The chart on the left is, the water we drink is safe. On the right, unsafe. One of the big, I think, trends that I noticed was there was a steeper incline in thinking the water was unsafe for, I guess, the Black ethnicity, that was, declining in the safety trust. So the alternative, and I'm glad to see that no one here is drinking out of the alternative and you all have your reusable bottles. Yeah, I see a Capri Sun over there. Those are pretty good. So, but the alternative is bottled water or water filling stations, kiosks. Take a look at the right one. Actually, the one on the left, that's actually taken at the Ingalls and Mills River. So we do have these kiosks. But the one on the right, that is a watermill kiosk. We don't have these in this area, but I wanted to show that because the city of Houston, these things are prevalent. So here's a map that was produced by, there's actually a book, it's The Prophets of Distrust, very good book written by a University of Wisconsin professor, Manny Teodoro, very good read if you guys are interested. But this is out of his study, you can see this is, the blue dots are those watermill drinking water kiosks. And then you can see these are census blocks in Houston based on income. So the darker shades are higher income areas, and then the lighter shades are lower income areas. So you can kind of see where these are distributed over Houston. Same graphs, but this is, by race. So you can look at percentage of Black, percentage by Hispanic, and you can kind of notice the trends there as well. So this is just Houston, but I think it is, the marketing folks at the water, they're there to make a profit. So they know there are folks that depend on the alternative.
Adam, I
Sure.
have a question. I hope I'm not
No, please.
ahead of you or your data. So this is of Houston, Texas.
Yes, Houston. Yes.
So are there any projections with, with our area, with Hendersonville and
Sure.
Because Houston, how many
big.
people live in that city? It's much bigger than here,
Yeah.
albeit we're not nearly that size yet. We're not nearly that size. But are there any projections like
local data?
Well, for local data, because here, I don't know of anyone personally that, they're having too many water issues.
Yeah.
But maybe 10, 15, 20 years down the road, do you foresee any sort of issues with our water here?
No, not at all. I think our water source is, I'd say it's probably one of the best in the state. I mean, our source is the national forest. It's very good. I don't know enough about Houston's water to, they meet their Safe Drinking Water Act. It's safe to drink, but I think one of the things that I think this chart is interesting to me is, and at the session that I was at last month, one of the the gentleman there, he was Hispanic. He was from California, and he saw this. He was like, "Oh yeah, well, yeah, everyone knows that. It's because, in South American countries, Mexico, you don't drink the tap water because it's not safe." And when I go, I've been to South America once. I didn't drink the tap water. So I think a lot of this could be maybe just a lack of education and outreach and understanding that the water here is safe to drink. It's tested regularly. It meets, all the EPA scientific requirements. So that was the one thing that I saw from the Hispanic chart that I thought was interesting. We don't have data to this scale in Hendersonville. I wish we did. Maybe that's something we could try to get. But we don't have anything this in depth. I do have some other kind of more local spatial things closer to home that I'll show in a little bit. And if you're interested, we can share some more of those items as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So here's another study. This is tap water or beverage consumption by race. And you can see, on the left, tap water, a higher percentage of, this is from the American, the American Journal of Public Health. You can see there's a higher percentage of folks drink tap water, being, white and other races versus non-Hispanic and Blacks. And then bottled water, and then sugar sweetened beverages, sodas like that. There's a higher percentage for those ethnic groups. So back to the bottled water, it's expensive. So that Primo filling station that comes out to be about $1.40 a gallon. Aquafina, $1.89 a gallon, and then if you want to drink water that comes from halfway around the planet, it's $10.52 a gallon at Walmart. So it's expensive, as Hendersonville water costs less than 1 cent per gallon delivered to your faucet. This one is pretty interesting. So this is a snip of that Primo from the Mills River. So you can see their marketing campaign is to reduce consumers' confidence in their tap water. So really one of the biggest things that we can do from an affordability standpoint is educate our customers and make sure they have confidence to drink the tap water because it is less than 1 cent per gallon. A family of 4, if they're consuming, strictly bottled water, they'll spend, $75 to $120 per month on bottled water, whereas they're paying, less than 1 cent a gallon. It's a big difference. There's other things you can do for affordability, rate design. So monthly billing, we send all of our customers bills monthly. Some utilities do it every 2 months. So you get a bigger bill, not as often. So it's a bigger bill, hard to pay. Maybe it's, could sway a little bit depending on your usage, but monthly bills are more affordable. We also have a smaller base charge. So that's the set fee that you pay based on the consumption that's set. It's more affordable because it's not based on you're not going to get billed that if you have a low usage of water, right? So we also have an inclining block rate structure for our residential customers. So that's illustrated on the far right. So the more water you use, the higher price per gallon you'll pay for it. And that's broken into tiers, and we can get into our rate structure a little bit as well. We're also looking into a low initial volume tier, or a lower rate for those lower usage customers to provide that essential need for water. So for most folks, that's usually about 30 to 50 gallons per day per person. But when you start washing your cars and watering your grass, that's the water that you should maybe pay a little bit more for. That's the ideology behind it. One thing to mention is, or I guess be aware of, is larger families that may live in older homes with less efficient appliances and fixtures. They may use more water. So these, the inclining block and the low initial volume tiers, those may not be best for those certain customers, but there are additional customer assistance plans that we'll get into a little bit here shortly. So here's the city's rate structure. I'm not going to go in this to too much, but you can see on the left is the base charge you pay based on your meter size. That's that flat cost per month. You pay that regardless of how much water you use. And then on the right, you can see at the top our residential tiers, 0 to 6,000 gallons. You can see the rates you'll pay per 1,000, and then that rate increases as you use more and more water. So here's a average monthly household spending. We're doing a rate study right now, and I took this slide from the rate study consultant, but you can see the average, American spends $150 on electricity, $105 on cell phone service. But in Hendersonville, if you use 3,000 gallons per month, which is about our average residential customer, you pay $50 per month, the inside rate, which is less than the North Carolina average. Customer assistance program. So the city, this is our customer assistance plan. It's Helping Hand Outreach, or H2O. So this is donation based. Customers can elect to, or anyone can elect to donate to this program. And we then send that money to the Interfaith Assistance Ministry. And then, folks can reach out to them if they're having trouble paying their utility water sewer bill. And Interfaith will kind of provide that assistance. I think this program has been in place for about 10 years. And on average, we're receiving about $4,000 per year on average in donations and providing that to the Interfaith Assistance Ministry. Another customer assistance program, and this one's temporary. This one came from the federal government from kind of the COVID relief plan, but this is administered through the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. Similar kind of program. If you meet some of the criteria, income, and you're at jeopardy of having your service disconnected, then this program will kind of help pay your water bill. This is a temporary program. I think it's set to expire in September of 2023. So maybe something to kind of look at replacing in the future, maybe locally or non-locally. Disconnect for non-payment. So this is a heat map of our disconnections for non-payment in our utility system for 2022. So we had 855 accounts that had 2 or more water disconnections in 2022. And you can kind of see where they're distributed across our service area and Hendersonville. And I'll mention those 2 hot spots in Fletcher, and then I guess on the eastern part of town. Those are actually apartment complexes. So it's hard to say if those were folks who, were having difficulties paying their bill, or maybe they moved out and then, maybe they didn't get their accounts set up. So that's something where we don't meter apartments individually like that anymore, but that's an artifact of that old practice. So here's a distribution of those 855 accounts on the number of times their service was disconnected for non-payment. And a lot of these, it's difficult to know if it was a customer maybe just forgot to pay their water bill. I think a lot of these, once their water turns off, they pay immediately and they call to get their water turned back on. But some, there's potential that some of these folks may have trouble actually paying their bills. So I'll kind of get into the utility goals overall. We saw some of the workforce. So I think there's definitely some rooms for improvement for our workforce. Improving public trust through education and outreach, that consumer confidence in our tap water and understanding the value of water, I think is important for an affordability standpoint. And And we want to keep maintaining an affordable service through efficient operations, providing that high quality water so folks don't drink tap or bottled water. And then also through any rate and fee design that we can produce to improve affordability. We also want to improve our customer assistance programs. I think there's a lot of opportunity to improve those programs, especially as the federally funded one is phasing out. I think there's a need there that we could improve. There's also improvements that in our policy and procedures, especially for our disconnections. I think finding the customers that actually have difficulties paying their water bill and getting them in touch with the customer assistance programs are important. And then getting folks that just forget to pay their water bills, maybe getting them set up where they remember. And then there's also opportunities for the utility to, we do a lot of construction projects, and there's a lot of contracts that we have on an annual or basis. And some of the projects that we do, depending on the funding, there's actually there's goals for utilizing these businesses. Well, usually it's 10%. And we do that on a lot of these larger projects. We've got a $23 million water intake project now that, there was a 10% historically underutilized business goal. And we do have some of those businesses working on that project.
Can I ask you a quick question about the disconnect?
Sure.
When is someone's water disconnected after not paying how many bills?
So it's 45 days after the bill is due. So that's our current policy. So if the bill
is that a pretty standard across the board for other utilities and for other places?
Yeah, I think that is pretty standard.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Madam Chair, we've looked at a couple of different things. I think at one point we let it go 60 days, but as it relates to, if you look at the heat map heat map and history, a lot of the disconnections do tend to be in our lower income areas.
Right.
And the longer we go, the deeper the hole that folks may get into. So we have found that a shorter period actually works better, trying to keep that cost burden down versus waiting for two bills to elapse. And we've actually reduced some of our penalties because realizing that the penalties were causing people to be on the disconnect list to, the late penalties and those kinds of. Finance has been trying and utilities have been trying to work. And that's, as Adam talked about, some of our policy improvements and things that we'll be taking ultimately to the city council. We'll look at how do we run, we have to run that, it's in business, it's an enterprise. So we have to have the revenue to provide the service, but at the same time, how do we do it in a way that we're not penalizing people to a point that we're disconnecting their water, which hurts trust, and things like that.
That was my next question. Is there a reconnect fee?
I think we have that fee now.
What is that fee?
Oh man. I think it depends on what time. Yeah. There's a during business hours, and I think there's an after hours fee. I want to say it's $40 during hours and maybe $100 after hours. Yeah. So those are the kind of fees and rate structure and policy improvements that I think, are something that we're exploring. Yeah. To improve this, because it's something that every utility is dealing with, right?
Certainly.
The water is the most basic one as I see it. You can live okay without electricity. The temperatures are moderate, but without water, that seems to be the most necessary one. So, yeah.
Mm-hmm. So, and that's one reason we wanted Adam to present is because, the mindset around the country is being how, we have historical or legacy programs and policies. And, as part of this work, we're re-examining some of those things because
it does put the poorest people at a disadvantage to get reconnected.
Right.
Yeah. So when they are disconnected, are they immediately referred to one of these organizations, IAM or someone else that can help them pay their bills?
Yeah, and again, it's kind of, remember.
I don't mean to put you on the spot. You look nervous all of a sudden.
I'm an engineer too, right? So I don't, this is not my, my area of expertise.
That's not my intention. I apologize if it came across that way. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
You mentioned about disconnections taking place in lower income households. Like, what do you do to prevent that? Like, do you send out notifications ahead of time or?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So right now, I think it's, the bill is due under a certain amount of days. And I think at day 25, there's, I want to say they send an email out, or whatever, I think it's an email.
We sent an email and
Yeah. But I think there's other things that we could improve on. We've talked about a little bit about, we have to send a technician out to the site to turn off the meter. Well, if our technicians have some sort of, way to accept payment in the field, maybe that's something that they could do there if it's, if they can make that payment. But yeah, and
partial payments
or partial payment. Sure. I think we do have payment plans that folks can get signed up with, but getting back, it's tough sometimes to determine if that person is getting disconnected because, well, they just forgot to pay their water bill, or if it's actually because of, they can't, or there's a need. So that's a big distinguishing factor, I think, that needs to be determined. And then, yes, I think our folks are putting these customers in contact with our customer assistance program, Interfaith Assistance, and then, the temporary one that's ongoing now.
Thanks.
Yeah, sure.
Adam,
Mm-hmm.
are you aware that the Nature Conservancy Group has been monitoring the water system here in Henderson County, and they don't think our water is really all that great? Have anyone from that group contacted you?
I think it's the work. I think it's Mountain True's been doing the, they've been doing the Mud Creek studies as it relates to E. coli and those kind of things. So we are very aware, Melinda, of that. And that, fortunately, our drinking water does not come from Mud Creek. So, but there has been a concern ultimately of the E. coli that has come. And I think, I don't want to point fingers, but we come out pretty well compared to some of our agricultural uses and some of our septic tank folks. We're seeing that septic tank failures are really contributing, and agriculture use is what's contributing to some of that high E. coli. And
Yeah.
Nancy,
I'll speak for Mountain True. The testing we're doing is mostly for like recreational uses. And when you're talking about the city's drinking water, there's so much good advertising that could happen. Unfortunately, I don't think there's the resources, or hasn't been a priority to put resources into promoting the health of our water, our drinking water. Just look at the number of breweries that are in the city and choosing to use municipal water because it is such high quality. But it's also important to note that there are drinking water sources on the periphery of the city that, use well water testing. And so that's something that Mountain True is definitely looking into. So it's not necessarily like to blame the city water source, but I'm just looking at the periphery of the city. I had a question. Does that help answer I had a question regarding, because I have no doubt that our drinking water, the city's drinking water, is great. However, do you have a system of looking at the pipes like in older homes, or, because I assume there's a line where your responsibility for the drinking water health stops once it enters someone's home. So I don't know if there's any partnerships with public health departments, or that could be part of the publicity around safer drinking water.
So as far as ownership of the pipes, that between public and private, it's the water meter. That's the ownership line. So the water meter and everything back is the utility, and then in the house is private. We do sampling, water sampling throughout our water system. I don't know how many sampling. There's a lot of sampling locations. And we sample for like bacteria. And I think there's like some lead and copper constituents that are sampled. It's actually interesting. The EPA just recently made some revisions to their lead and copper rule. And the big emphasis on that, kind of coming out of the Flint, Michigan crisis, were lead service pipes. So we've actually started doing analysis on our system because we don't have as much robust data information on our water service connections as we do our big pipes in the street. So doing a data analysis, looking at the year of the install of the house, or maybe when the house was built, and kind of like finding where these lead service lines could exist. So we've identified, I think, close to about 80 services that have a higher likelihood of lead service. I think we've dug up and checked, I think, almost 15% of those, and none of them have been so far. But that is a program that we're going to continue doing. We're actually mandated to do it by the EPA. So we will have a service line inventory sometime in the next few years. And then going on to the private side. So we are checking both sides of the water meter. So the public side and the private side. That's a good question.
And I think we have time for one more question because we still got to get to Mike Huffman, and we're approaching 7 o'clock, or it is 7 o'clock.
Sorry.
Bahia, you had a question for Adam?
Yeah, just thank you so much. Wonderful presentation, Adam. Can you tell me if bills follow the property or do they follow individuals?
Yeah, so you're talking like kind of a rental tenant situation there?
Actually, more like what we sometimes see in communities that experience gentrification or transition is that like a grandparent or another, an ancestor will pass on, leave the house to the next generation, and maybe they have a bill, an outstanding bill. And then the company will, maybe the grandparent didn't pay a bill or missed a couple of payments, and they can't get, the new generation can't get the water turned on because the bill follows the property. It doesn't follow the person. And
I see.
This sometimes happens, again, a lot in low income communities.
Yeah, I think, again, I'm not as familiar with our customer service side of things, but I know from from like a rental landlord arrangement, to set up an account, you have to provide, basically a lease or something that proves you live in that house. I could see how that may be difficult if you had a relative pass on and they weren't able to provide that as the property owner. But yeah, that's a good question. That's something we can look into.
But yeah, we'll look into it. But I think if I remember correctly, by state law, it follows the person whose name the account is in. So if the name changes, we cannot prohibit somebody from being connected to water. So even if they're a relative, if they show that there's been a change of occupancy, then we cannot deny access based on a previous person who lived there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thanks. Good job. All right. And if the committee will bear with us just a little bit longer, Mike Huffman has, and this should be fun. So
How about different water?
Mike's here to talk about stormwater.
Good evening, everybody. My first time meeting with this board. My name is Mike Huffman. I'm the Stormwater Division Manager with the city. I see some familiar faces. And tonight I want to discuss, I think, a fun project, a great project the city's taken on. And it's the Brooklyn Creek restoration in Sullivan Park in the Green Meadows community. Does this work, Allison? Wonderful. So a little brief background on the project. Several years ago, during some of our community input meetings that the city did, we heard from members of the community that, the stream in Sullivan Park is really not something people typically want to interact with. That it's overgrown. It's maybe a little bit trashy and polluted. And so we started exploring opportunities to restore that stream and kind of bring it back to its former glory and make it something that people want to, interact with and feel comfortable being near, and created a amenity for the community. With the Boys and Girls Club there, we'd be able to provide some nature-based community recreation and education opportunities. So we pursued some grant funding, and we were awarded grant money from the state of North Carolina to restore that stream. And as part of that project, we recognized that, to the next slide, sorry. We found out that the stream actually didn't have an official name. So if you go look on a map, like the USGS map or Henderson County Go Maps or something like that, there's no name for that stream. And there's actually a program called a Name That Creek program, in which communities can suggest names to the USGS and the group that provides names for geographical features around the country. And so we worked with a group called Riverlink out of Asheville to talk to the community, the Green Meadows community, and look and ask them, what would be some names that you potentially would suggest for the name the stream. And again, the goal of this program is to foster a connection and a sense of shared stewardship for the people that live near the streams. And so we talked to the people in the community. We did some surveys with Riverlink, and go to the next slide, please. We selected the name of Brooklyn Creek. And the purpose of that is to honor the Brooklyn community that was there prior to the urban renewal. And actually, this picture was an aerial photograph that NCDOT took in 1951. So prior to the urban renewal, and you can see that blue line represents the stream, and that is now where Sullivan Park is. And you can see that traditional, in the 1950s and before, there were houses, right along that road and right next to the stream. So we really wanted to engage with the community and try and understand the community's relationship prior to the stream becoming kind of an eyesore, and if people had interacted with the stream, and if they had stories about how they remembered the stream as a child, or how they interacted with it. Can you go to the next slide, please? And sorry, I'll step back a little bit. So the Brooklyn Creek name was selected, and then that name was approved by City Council. It has to be approved by the governing board of the municipality where the stream or feature is. And so that's been submitted to USGS for approval. There's not any reason that they wouldn't approve it. Next slide. So our next steps, the next step, and the reason that I wanted to speak here this evening is that we're working to develop a sign that honors the history of the Brooklyn Green Meadows community and its relationship to Brooklyn Creek. And we're working with Riverlink, and actually was it last week, Nancy? We had a Zoom meeting. Nancy joined us, a young man named Terrell Brown joined us, and Crystal Colley and some other folks. And we're trying to make some connections. And actually, Mr. Gash, your wife, Katie, was brought up as a great point of contact. And I met with her on yesterday. And she gave me some great contacts of individuals to reach out to through her work with the 9th Avenue School. So I'm happy to report that and actually Miss Lawrence, your name was given to me by Katie this morning. I would love to get your contact information if you have any, if you would like to share any, if you have stories or memories of the stream that you'd like to share. And so we got some great information. A gentleman by the name of Ed King was another man that was brought to that we were given contact information. I think Mr. Johnny Washington was another gentleman. And there was one other person, the name escapes me right now.
James Sitton, Sonny Sitton, because he lived.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. That was another Sitton. I remember that name. That was another name. And so we are actively, Riverlink is reaching out to those. Obviously, we hosted a Zoom meeting, but I understand that Zoom might not be the most friendly or easily accessible, avenue for older members of the community that were there before the stream, before Sullivan Park. So now we're reaching out to those individuals and really trying to gain input and feedback from the community on their past relationship with the stream, but also some potential design opportunities, beyond just the signage, like some things that they might like to see incorporated in the design of the restoration that would kind of reignite and refoster that relationship with the stream so people feel more comfortable, going down to the stream and enjoying the stream and having it be a thing of value for the community. So our next steps beyond the sign are to begin the restoration. And in that process, we'll work with an engineer to do the technical, stuff that Adam likes to do, and design the actual stream. But there's, again, opportunities for community engagement through that. We'll begin the construction. And then what we'd like to do is work with like the Boys and Girls Club and other community groups to have a community planting day, because there'll be a lot of vegetation that needs to be planted as part of that project once the heavy construction is completed. So that's just, I realize it's 7 that's kind of the update that I had, and that's all I got. So any questions, comments, or feedback?
So we can give you Mike's contact information, but Josh actually lives in the neighborhood. So, it may be a good contact too. And as we bring the next generation in, to get the input, and there's even another generation sitting
Over there.
who's probably tired of sitting here. So, but anyway, that will hopefully enjoy Brooklyn Creek and Sullivan Park. So, Mike, thanks for your work.
All right.
Thank
thanks,
you.
and thanks
Thank
you all.
you,
Thanks, Mike.
Mike, I think
Yes, ma'am.
some of the older ones maybe will be glad that you're doing this, because when we were growing up, it flooded and that stream was toxic because sewage came into that area. So
Okay.
that's
Well,
some
yeah.
of the memories.
Well, maybe we won't put that on the sign, but all the work that our utilities done to work, through the sewer system, and what was it, 1962 when you all built the first facility? So I'm sure there was a little bit of an issue prior to that. All right, thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much. All right, any other business before we adjourn this evening?
No.
Anybody else? Okay, I think we can adjourn. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here.